Hey YouTube, Philly J here with Different Dimension Gaming, coming at you with my competitive Predaplant deck. This version is boosted to 45 instead of 40 cards, but the adjustments we're making are really important to make it competitive and keep up with the current meta. But with that being said, let's jump right in. Just jump right in here. We're still going to play our 3 copies of Predaplant for Scorpio. Still the best normal summon in the deck. Still the card we're trying to get our consistency with. Normal summon it, discard a monster, add special summon a Predaplant monster from your deck. Only activate once per turn, but it's just like summon it, pitch, search your Darlingtonia Cobra, which is right here. Darlingtonia Cobra, when it's summoned by the effect of a Predaplant monster, can add a polymerization spell card or fusion spell card from your deck to your hand. So it searches every fusion or polymerization card in the game. No matter what it is. It's still one of the craziest cards ever printed. The only setback is that it's a once per duel effect. That being said, it goes over there. We're going to play still our 2 copies of Predaplant Clamidosindue. When it's on the field, it can be used as a polymerization. And if your opponent has monsters with predator counters, you can use stuff on your opponent's side of the field as possible. You do have to use this in the fusion summon of whatever you are making. And it only summons dark monsters off of its effect. 2 copies of Predaplant Biplisp. This is a card that we don't want to open as consistently because we want to search it or send it to the graveyard off of our, or for Scorpio after we search it with our Predaplanting, or mill it with our Predapractice. But when it's sent to the graveyard, it adds a Predap card from deck to hand, so it adds spells or monsters. And if your opponent has a monster with a predator counter, you can special summon it from the graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. And then for our Pendulum Scales, we're going to play 3 copies of Predaplant Bufollicula. When it's in the Pendulum Scale, it is treated as a polymerization, so you scale it, activate the effect, fusion summon from field or hand, and then when it's sent to the extra deck as a extra or graveyard as a fusion material, you can add a scale that besides itself from your extra deck to your hand. Since it can't add itself back, we are going to play 1 copy of Predaplant Triantis. When it's in the Pendulum Zone, you can use monsters in your Pendulum Scales to fusion summon. So if you have Triantis and Bufollicula in your Scales, you can activate Bufollicula and fuse these 2 in your Pendulum Scales. We are on a much lower Predaplant monster count. We're just playing the key cards, being these ones. Really is just these 12 monsters that you want to play. Because we're playing a lot of engines, and we're playing a lot of stuff to help us search these cards out. But with that being said, we're going to move on to the Predaplant spells next. And with that, we're going to play 3 copies of Predapranded. When it's activated, special summon a Predaplant monster from your hand and then add a Predap card from your deck to your hand. So ideally, you would special, or for Scorpio, use the effect, add your Biplisp to your hand, discard the Biplisp for your Orpha Scorpio, summon your Darlingtonia Cobra, and then search in whatever way you want. This does lock you into fusions for the rest of the turn, which we're fine with because we're only playing fusions anyways. We're going to play 1 copy of Predaplast and 1 copy of Predaplanting. Predaplast is a very situational card in that I don't love playing it, but it comes up often enough that it's worth playing. So reveal any number of Predap cards in your hand and then target that many monsters on the field and give them all predator counters. A predator counter makes an opponent's monster a level 1 dark monster, but only if it has a level. So ranks and links don't change, they only become dark. Predaplanting, when activated, send a Predaplant monster from deck to graveyard, and then place a Predator counter on each face-up monster on the field. And if you do, any of those monsters that are level 2 or higher become level 1, and they all become dark. And then if you fusion summon while it's in your graveyard, you can banish it and destroy a card on the field. And if a Predaplant monster would be destroyed while Predaplants is in your graveyard, you can banish it and negate the destruction. That's it for our Predaplant engine. We have cut it down to 17 cards, but it's to make way for consistency tools and hand traps. So we're going to move on to the branded cards now. So we're going to play 3 copies of Branded Fusion, 2 copies of Fallen of Albaz, 3 copies of Branded Opening, 1 Alubra, the Jester of Despia, move this out of the way a little bit, and 1 copy of Branded in Red. So, Branded Fusion lets us fusion summon from the deck by sending stuff to the graveyard as material. It locks us into fusion summons. Fallen of Albaz is the consistency card you need for all your Branded Fusion plays, and if it's normal or special summon, you can discard a card and fuse with anything on the field. So it's a super poly on legs. It's a little bit like our Calamity Dosendu, except that you need to discard a card for it, whereas Calamity Dosendu can just activate itself if your opponent has a Predator counter. Branded Opening, you discard a card, take 1 Despia monster, and either add it to your hand or special summon it in defense position, and for the rest of the turn you're locked into fusion summons. If a fusion monster you control will be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish Branded Opening from your graveyard to protect it. Only use each effect once per turn. Alubra, the Jester of Despia. If it's normal or special summon, add a branded spell trap from your deck to your hand. And if a face-up fusion monster you control is destroyed by battle or leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, while it's in the graveyard, you can target 1 effect monster your opponent controls, special summon this card, and if you do, negate that target's effect at the end of this turn. So the second effect really does not come up that often, because we are playing so many cards already that protect our fusions, but we want Despia in the graveyard so we can use our Branded in Red. Branded in Red says target a Despia monster or Fallen of Albaz in your graveyard, add it to your hand, and then immediately you can apply the following effect, which in this deck we're always going to do. So when you add it to your hand, you immediately fusion summon with stuff on your side of the field. So you add it back to your hand and then immediately fusion summon. And we do this for consistency, and it keeps our Predaplanting alive, and we can make some powerhouse cards on our opponent's turn. That's it for the branded stuff. We are still playing a small Edge Imp engine in our 2 copies of Edge Imp Chain and 3 copies of Fright for Patchwork. Edge Imp Chain, when sent to graveyard, adds a Fright for card from deck to hand. So we add our Fright for Patchwork, and Fright for Patchwork, when activated, searches a Edge Imp monster and our polymerization. So it's really cool because it's like 1 searches 2 and then 2 searches 1 and a fusion card. You can only use each effect of each once per turn, but what we like to do is use Patchwork to search chain in our poly and then fuse away our chain so we can search the other Patchwork so we have follow-up on our next turn. And then for our fusion cards, we're playing 2 polymerization, 1 instant fusion, and 2 super polymerizations. So polymerizations send any number of cards from your field or hand to the graveyard and fusion summon. Instant fusion, pay 1,000 life points and summon a level 5 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck. It's treated as a fusion summon. You can only activate this effect once per turn. Super polymerization, while also searchable in this deck, is what people call spell speed 4, in that neither player can respond to it with card effects. That does not mean that it cannot be responded to, but you, the player, cannot choose to respond to it, which makes it one of the best cards in the game, and it fuses from both sides of the field, which we do a lot in this deck because we are punishing our opponent for having the audacity to play the game. And then just for a couple extra cards here, we're going to play one copy of the Light Hex Sealed Fusion and one copy of Called by the Grave. Light Hex Sealed Fusion once per turn can take the place of any fusion material. It does not have to be specifically named, which is great because we use it a lot just to fill gaps in our fusion summoning, specifically off of the Albion effect. And then Call by the Grave, target a monster either in your opponent's graveyard, banish it, and if you do, negate its effects to the end of the next turn. So this is pretty much, we're only using this to stop Ash Blossom because Branded Fusion loses to Ash, which is why we're playing so many cards before Branded Fusion to bait the Ash Blossom, and then we can fuse away no problem. And then for hand traps, really small lineup, we're just going to play 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Small lineup, but we need these tools to help us push further. Ash Blossom, when your opponent would summon a monster from deck, add a card from deck to hand, or send a card from deck to graveyard, discard this card and negate the effect. Infinite Impermanence negates a face-up monster on the field by targeting it, and if it's set before it's activated, it negates all spells and traps in that same column. Don't play cards in your own Imperm column. I've done it. I've seen people do it. It sucks. But it happens. Because a lot happens in this game, and you can't remember everything. But that being said, let's move on to the extra deck. And starting with the branded cards in extra, we're going to play 1 Albion the Branded Dragon, 1 Lubellion the Searing Dragon, 1 Mirror Jade the Ice Blade Dragon, 1 Albalenitis, and 1 Masquerade. So Albion needs Fallen of Albaz and a light monster, which is where our Hex Sealed Fusion comes into place. Lubellion needs a Fallen of Albaz and a dark monster, which is where our Edge Chain comes into place. Albion, when it's sent to the graveyard in the end phase, you can either add to hand or set a branded spell trap, which is usually how we're getting access to our copy of Branded in Red. Mirror Jade needs Fallen of Albaz and either a Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link monster. Once per turn, you can banish 1 monster on the field, quick effect. You can't activate that effect on the next turn. So it's every other turn, banish a card. And then when it's sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card, in the end phase, send all your opponent's monsters to the graveyard. Albalenitis, the Abyss Dragon, needs Fallen of Albaz and 1 or more dragon monsters. And what's really cool about Yu-Gi-Oh! And Fusion Summoning is that if you're up against Dragon Link, you can just set your Fallen of Albaz and fuse away their whole board because you don't need a fusion or polymerization card to summon Albalenitis. It's what we call a contact fusion. And finally, Masquerade the Blazing Dragon needs a Despia monster and either a light or dark monster. And while you control this fusion summon card, when your opponent activates a card or effect, they have to pay 600 life points for each one. And while it's in the graveyard, if your opponent controls a Ritual, Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link monster, quick effect, you can special summon it, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use this effect once per turn. And just to extend through our branded combos, we're playing 1 Red Eyes Dark Dragoon and 1 Guardian Chimera. So a really easy way, if you're worried about a lot of hand traps on your opponent's board, you can summon Albion off of Branded Fusion using Albaz and the Light Hex Sealed Fusion, and then you can summon Red Eyes Dark Dragoon by banishing those same 2 cards from the graveyard. Because The light Hex fusion takes the place of Dark Magician, and Albaz is a dragon. And then we summon Guardian Chimera off of our Branded in red, while we have the Aluber in our graveyard. Because it's a Despia monster, we add it back to hand, and it needs 3 monsters to summon it, but they all have to be on your side of the field or in your hand. So if you use 2 monsters on the field and 1 card in hand, you destroy 2 cards and then draw 1. Or if you use 1 card on the field and 2 cards in hand, you destroy 1 card and draw 2. So it kind of replaces whatever you use it for. So if you 2 on field, you take care of 2 monsters on your opponent's side of the field. And while Polymerization is in your graveyard, your opponent cannot target it with card effects. Red Eye's Dark Dragoon cannot be destroyed by card effects, and neither player can target it with card effects. During your main phase, you can destroy one monster your opponent controls up to the number of normal monsters you use for its summon, which we don't use that effect. What effect we do use is when your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can discard a card, negate the activation, and destroy it. And if you do this, it gains 1,000 attack. So it starts at 3,000, your opponent activates a card, we activate its effect, discard a card, negate the effect, destroy it, and now it's a 4,000 attack monster. And then moving into our Predaplant fusions, we're playing 1 Ambulinoides, 1 Chimera Flesia, 1 Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon, 1 Typher Overtome, and 1 Dragostapelia. So, Ambulinoides needs 2 Predaplant monsters. When it's fusion summoned, you can add a Predaplant monster or a Predap spell trap from your deck, graveyard, or face extra deck to your hand. You can target 1 monster your opponent controls with a Predator counter, or 1 monster you control, tribute it, and if you do special summon a Predaplant monster from your deck, you can only use each effect once per turn. What we really try to do off of this little combo is we try to use Orphis Scorpio to summon Dragostapelia, search instant fusion, summon this guy, search a card, tribute the Darling Tonya Cobra with our Ambulinoides, and then continue comboing from there. The combo video for this deck will be up on Thursday. I'm just kind of sprinkling in a couple fun things to do. Chimera Flesia needs a Predaplant monster and a Dark monster. Once per turn, you can target a monster on the field with a level less or equal to than this card. This card is a level 7, and banish it. When an attack is involved with this card, you can activate this effect. This card gains 1,000 attack, and the opponent's monster loses 1,000 attack. So it becomes 3,500, and your opponent's monster loses 1,000 attack. Typher Overtome needs 3 dark monsters on the field, so it is a super poly target. This kind of is, but it's shaky. Typher Overtome gains attack equal to the total attack of all other monsters on the field with a Predator counter. You can only use each of the following effects once per turn. When your opponent would special summon a monster from the extra deck while you control this fusion summon card, quick effect, you can negate that summon, and if you do, destroy the monster. So if your opponent were to Pendulum summon from the extra deck using 3 monsters, you can use this effect to negate all 3 summons and destroy them. And if your opponent has a monster with a Predator counter, you can special summon this card from your graveyard in defense position. Great effect. So it replaces itself with itself if your opponent has a monster with a Predator counter, and while it's fusion summoned, your opponent loses an extra deck summon. You just have to time it properly. Dragostapelia needs a fusion monster and a dark monster. Once per turn, quick effect, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls, place 1 Predator counter on it, and its level becomes 1, it becomes a dark, and its activated effects are negated. It negates the effects of all opponent's monsters with a Predator counter. So if you activate Predaplanting, give everything a Predator counter, and then activate this, you suddenly have skill drain. Starving Venom Predapower Fusion Dragon needs a dark fusion monster and a fusion monster. which sounds like a lot, but in this deck it's actually really easy to do. It's always treated as a Predaplant card. Once per turn, when a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can tribute one monster with a Predator counter, negate the activation, and destroy that card. If this fusion summon card you control is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card, you can target one dark monster in your graveyard and special summon it. It doesn't have to be this card, but you kind of want it to be this card because the negate effect is a soft once per turn. And these two are also great Super Poly targets. And speaking of Super Poly, let's get into all of those targets because we are playing more of them in this deck versus our casual version of this deck. So we're going to play one Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, one Garura Wings of Resonant Life, and one Mud Dragon of the Swamp. Starving Venom Fusion Dragon needs 2 dark monsters on the field except tokens. If it's fusion summoned, you can make this card gain attack equal to one opponent's special summon monster until the end of this turn. And once per turn, you can target one level 5 or higher monster your opponent controls. Until the end phase, this card's name becomes that monster's name and it takes the effects. So the first effect is really good because it just makes this thing huge. The second effect is situational, but the third effect is where this card is crazy. If this card is destroyed, destroy all special summon monsters your opponent controls. Just your opponent. So you summon this, they get rid of it, and it wipes the board. Garura, the Wings of Resonant Life, needs 2 monsters with the same type and attribute, but different names. Any battle damage it inflicts to your opponent is doubled, and if it's sent to the graveyard, you can draw 1 card. You can only use each effect once per turn. So it's really good if your opponent's playing something like Sprite, because you can just get rid of 2 of their Thunder monsters and summon it. Or you can use your own stuff if you need to just keep going for damage in the battle phase. And then Mud Dragon of the Swamp needs 2 monsters with the same attribute but different types. So like 2 dark monsters, but one is a dragon and one is a plant. Your opponent cannot target this card or monsters on the field with this card's attribute. And once per turn quick effect, you can make this card's attribute whatever you declare. So because like this whole deck is pretty much dark monsters, you're gonna call dark, and then all your monsters are untargetable, which is great. The only monster we're playing that isn't dark is our Lubellion, the Searing Dragon. Everything else is dark. Everything. And Lubellion doesn't really stick around that long because it's a really good card to fuse into your Dragostapelia or your Predapower, whatever you need. But that being said, let us know what you think down below. It's your fusion lineup. The combo tutorial for this deck will be out on Thursday, and then next week we're going to upload Phantom Knights. Now, I cannot figure out a casual version for Phantom Knights, so it's just going to be the competitive version, the combos, and then after that we're going to do Red Dragon Archfiend, and then I think Pendragon's going to have a couple of decks for you guys to watch. But until then, I've been Philly J, and we'll see you next time.